They filed false charges and took our son. Then we made sure everyone knew. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Story Zone. If you are new here, hit subscribe because we find the stories that make you feel things you were not prepared to feel. Today's story has a lot of things in it. It has bureaucratic cruelty and legal warfare and a moment in a parking lot and a moment in a church and a very specific scene involving a puddle that I need you to just trust me on. But underneath all of the scorched earth, and there is a lot of scorched earth, this is really a story about a young family that was handed the worst version of a nightmare, and what they chose to do once they were standing on the other side of it. Let's get into it. OP starts by saying, I need you to understand something before I tell you any of this. I am not a dramatic person. I am not the kind of person who makes scenes or holds grudges or plans things out with the specific cold patience of someone who has decided that justice is a project and they are the project manager. Or at least I was not that person. I am 26 years old. I work in accounting. I am married to Clara, 25, and together we have a 17-month-old son who is, without exaggeration, the coolest little human on the planet. I did not become the person in this story because I wanted to. I became him because someone handed me no other choice, and once they did, I turned out to be remarkably good at it. Clara's family is, and I want to be precise here, a specific kind of dysfunction that wears the costume of love so well that you spend years wondering if you are the problem. Her father, William, is a retired Air Force man who works a mid-level government contractor job and has organized his entire sense of self around the belief that the world should be consulting him. Not because he has demonstrated unusual wisdom, but because he has decided he has, and the repetition of a belief with enough confidence tends to fill a room the way smoke fills a room, quietly, completely, until you realize you cannot breathe. He tried to control our wedding, our apartment search, our career decisions. He called landlords before we could sign leases, posing as a concerned father, warning them we were young and irresponsible. We found out because one landlord mentioned the helpful man who had phoned. When we asked William to respect our boundaries, he went quiet for 2 weeks in the sulk of a 55-year-old man who has confused control with love so thoroughly that he cannot find the seam between them anymore. Clara's mother, Marilyn, works for DCF in Oregon, Child Protective Services. She introduces this fact into every conversation the way certain people introduce their degrees, not as context but as credential, as armor, as a reason that whatever she is about to say should not be questioned. She had a habit at family gatherings of cornering relatives and conducting what she called check-ins, asking about coping mechanisms and relationship dynamics and parenting philosophies with the clinical interest of someone who believes their professional life has given them a map to everyone else's interior. It was not malicious exactly, or it was not only malicious. It was the particular blindness of a person who has mistaken surveillance for care for so long that they can no longer tell the difference. Then there is Riley, Clara's younger sister, 23, who peaked somewhere around junior prom and has been quietly furious about it ever since. She still lives at home. She works part-time at a boutique that sells expensive candles to people who have decided that ambient lighting is a personality. She has a talent for starting fires between other people and then standing nearby, warm. I tell you all of this not because it is interesting backstory. I tell you because understanding who these people are is the only way to understand what they were capable of. And what they were capable of turned out to be more than I had imagined. The baby shower was a warning we did not fully read. We asked for something small. They arrived 2 hours early and rearranged our home. William moved furniture and occupied the grill with the ease of a man who believes that his presence in a space is an improvement of it. When Clara asked them to stop, he reframed her objection as ingratitude with the practiced efficiency of someone who has been doing that specific thing for decades. Their contribution to the shower had been a $40 Target gift card. The royalty billing was not included. Marilyn used the gift opening to practice her art form. When Clara's grandmother gave us a handmade quilt she had spent months on, William said, "That's nice, but store-bought is usually more durable." When my parents gave us a high-end baby monitor, Marilyn said, "In my professional experience, parents who rely too heavily on technology often become disconnected from their children." Riley posted Instagram stories claiming credit for decorations Clara had made herself, and when confronted about it, said, "You're going to be too busy to manage your social media anyway, so I'm helping." At the end of the night, Marilyn pulled Clara aside to say she was concerned about me as a potential father because I had not sought William's parenting guidance. She mentioned she had been observing our dynamics throughout the pregnancy. She used the phrase insular environment. She said our habit of making decisions together without consulting the extended family was a red flag. Clara and I sat with that conversation for a long time after everyone left. Then we made our decision. Holidays only. Need to know information. We were not cutting them off. We were just declining to hand them the controls anymore. The reaction was not subtle. William began making comments about how we were keeping his grandson from him. Every minor thing became evidence of incompetence. Diaper rash was negligence. A fussy afternoon was malnutrition. He was building a case before he had a charge. The breaking point came on a night when Riley called Clara and screamed for long enough that I could hear her from across the room. She called us secretive. She called me a brainwasher. She called our baby their grandson in the possessive, territorial way of someone who has decided that love is ownership if you feel it strongly enough. When Clara started crying, I took the phone. I told Riley clearly and without decoration that this was our son, that we decided who he saw and when, and that continuing this conversation would result in her not seeing him at all. Then I hung up. She called back. We let her leave a voicemail. 5 minutes of a woman unraveling. She ended by saying, "You'll regret treating family this way." 2 weeks later, CPS came to our door with a warrant. The allegations were these. We were not feeding our son, we left him crying without response, and Clara was using drugs. Our son was 8 months old. He was happy. He was hitting his milestones. He was smaller than average, yes, but some babies simply are, and we would later understand why in a way that reframed everything. 2 months before CPS arrived, our pediatrician, Dr. Roth, had given him a clean bill of health and noted in his records that we were attentive, engaged parents. I had those records on our kitchen table when the CPS worker arrived. Her name was Janet Mills. I made certain I knew that before she finished introducing herself because I already understood, somewhere in the part of me that analyzes numbers for a living, that this interaction was going to become documentation. Janet Mills moved through our home with the energy of a conclusion that had already been reached and was now merely collecting evidence to support itself. She had a clipboard. She checked boxes. She barely looked at our son. When I held out Dr. Roth's records, the chart, the notes, the signed statement of a clean checkup, she did not take them. "Sir," she said, "please do not interfere with our process." She did not ask for Dr. Roth's contact information. She did not review the records. She had made her decision before she knocked on our door, and what was on that kitchen table was not going to change it. I found out later that William had called the CPS hotline 6 separate times over 3 weeks. The first call expressed mild concern about weight. The 6th call claimed Clara was using heroin and that we were physically and emotionally abusing our son. Each call escalating, each one building the architecture of a lie that someone with professional credentials would eventually ratify. Marilyn had not filed the reports herself. She had been smarter than that. She had coached them. She had told the Washington workers, from her position as an Oregon DCF employee, that they should trust her read of the situation. That she had seen this pattern before. That they needed to act quickly. They placed our son with William, not a neutral foster family, with the man who had made the calls. They assigned us Gary Thompson. Gary Thompson had been practicing law, I would estimate, since slightly before the invention of the filing cabinet. He moved through the world with the energy of a man who had long ago made peace with the gap between the law as a concept and the law as it was actually practiced in underfunded family courts on a Tuesday morning. He was juggling, by his own admission, somewhere around 50 cases. Ours was somewhere in that stack. Our first meeting was in his office. He spent the first 10 minutes looking for our file. When he found it, he squinted at it in a way that suggested he was not entirely certain it was ours. "So they took your kid because," he said, "because my father-in-law made 6 false calls to a hotline over 3 weeks." I said. "And a caseworker removed our son without reviewing the medical documentation we handed her." He made a note. Right. "And you have records?" "I have records showing our son had a clean checkup 2 months before removal. I have records showing he was thriving. I have the caseworker's name. He made another note. These cases usually resolve in 6 to 8 months, he said. I looked at him. He looked at his notepad. Neither of us said anything for a moment. 6 to 8 months, I repeated, the way you repeat something when you are trying to determine if the words mean what you initially understood them to mean. He nodded with the gentle confidence of a man delivering a difficult truth he has delivered many times and has therefore stopped feeling the weight of. I drove home. Clara was in the nursery. She was sitting in the glider we had bought when she was 6 months pregnant. The one we had spent 3 weekends arguing about in a furniture store because the color had to be exactly right for the room we had painted together and been so proud of. She had one of our son's stuffed animals in her lap, a small gray elephant he had named, in the limited vocabulary of an 8-month-old, something that sounded like but. She was not crying. She had passed through crying into something quieter and harder to name. She was just sitting there holding the elephant in the room we had built for him, in the house we had bought because it had the right nursery, and the room was full of everything except the child it had been made for. I sat down on the floor next to the glider and didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. We sat there together for a long time. The hearings happened every few weeks. Family court, fluorescent lights, the particular bureaucratic rhythm of a process that handles human catastrophe with the detachment of a system that has seen too much of it to be surprised anymore. William showed up to every hearing in his best suit. He brought a briefcase. Inside the briefcase, I eventually learned, was a collection of printed parenting articles and what I can only describe as a scrapbook, an actual physical scrapbook of photographs he had taken of our son during the months he had him. Photos at family gatherings. Photos in the backyard. Photos at the dinner table. William had organized them with captions. He presented them to the judge with the measured gravity of a man performing a rescue operation and wanting credit for it. The judge looked at those photos with the attentive nod of someone being offered evidence they find compelling. The judge looked at our documentation, Dr. Roth's records, the timeline of calls, the written account of what Janet Mills had and had not done in our kitchen, and moved on to the next item on the docket. During one session, William gave testimony about his fears for his grandson. He teared up. I want to be precise. This man, who had said on a recorded phone call that losing the child for a while would teach us to respect family, produced tears in a courtroom while describing his anguish at having to make the call to CPS. He talked about his service to his country. He said, "Your Honor, I didn't want to believe my own daughter was putting her child at risk. But as a grandfather and a veteran, I couldn't stand by and watch." The judge nodded slowly, the way people nod when they are watching something they find credible and moving. I sat at the table and kept my face still and thought about the 40 pages Liam and I had been building, the recordings we did not yet know existed, the paper trail that was accumulating in the background while William performed for an audience that was eating it up. During the recess after that session, I followed William to the parking garage. I want to tell you that I handled it with restraint. I did not. I walked up to him and got close enough that he had to step back against his car, and I looked at him for a moment while he arranged his face into the expression of a man who does not know why anyone would be upset with him. "You're enjoying this," I said. "I don't know what you mean," he said. But the corner of his mouth was doing something it should not have been doing if he had truly been the anguished grandfather he had just performed being for 45 minutes. My voice, when I answered, came out quieter than I expected. Quieter than shouting would have been. Quieter in the way that certain things come out when what is behind them is too large for volume to contain. "You stole my son because your feelings got hurt," I said. "You are a scared, small man who cannot stand not being in control, and you are going to answer for every single day of this." He started to say something. I put my hand on his chest and pushed him back against the car. Not hard enough to fall, hard enough to feel. His phone clattered to the ground. He looked at me with the specific expression of a person who has spent a long time believing they are untouchable and is now revising that belief. I picked up his phone, handed it back to him, walked away. Part of me wanted to go back. I kept walking. Clara stopped sleeping in any reliable way. She would be up at 2 in the morning, standing in the nursery doorway, not going in. Just standing there in the light from the hallway, looking at the crib. I would find her and bring her back to bed, and she would lie there with her eyes open and I would listen to her breathe until eventually one of us fell asleep. She forgot things. Small things at first, then larger ones. She would start to do something and lose the thread of why she had started. She stopped eating full meals without being prompted. She lost 15 pounds in 2 months without trying to. The dark circles under her eyes stopped going away. I watched my wife disappear piece by piece into a grief that had no end date, because the thing about a grief with no end date is that it cannot be mourned, it can only be inhabited. And she was inhabiting it. She was living inside the loss of a child who was still alive, who we could see twice a week for 2 hours under fluorescent lights, who would reach for us when the session ended and the supervised visits were quiet and the door opened and we had to leave him there. He will adjust to his new environment, a supervisor said to us once, when he reached for me at the end of a session. Said it the way you say something you have said many times. New environment. He was 8 months old. He had an environment. It was us. I pulled 12-hour days at work because going home to that quiet house was something I could only manage in small amounts. My manager praised my productivity. He did not know that every spreadsheet I was filling in was something my hands were doing while the rest of me was somewhere else entirely. Liam would come over at night with food and sit with us and not say the things that useless people say, the system will work itself out, be patient, stay positive. He just came. He helped me build the file. He sat with Clara when I could not and with me when I needed it and somehow always knew which one was required. It was Liam who finally said, about 6 weeks in, the thing I had been circling. Gary Thompson is not going to get your son home. I knew he was right. I had known it since the first meeting in that office. I had just been afraid that knowing it meant I had to do something about it that I did not have the money for and the energy felt very far away. Liam said, find the right person. Whatever it costs. I'll help you figure out the money part. I started making calls the next morning. Samuel Rodriguez had a reputation for taking on government agencies. Not rattling sabers at them. Taking them on, in the specific sense of walking into discovery with the documentation to make their exposure undeniable and the patience to see it through. He listened to everything. He did not move to reassure me. He asked questions that told me he already understood the architecture of what had happened before I had finished explaining it. When I was done, he was quiet for a moment. What they did to you isn't just morally wrong, he said. It's actionable. The false reports, the abuse of professional credentials, the placement with the accuser, and the failure to review exculpatory evidence you placed directly in the caseworker's hands, that last part is our opening because it is documented, it is provable, and it is indefensible. He filed immediately. A motion demanding documentation of exactly what Janet Mills had reviewed before removing our son. The answer came back as the thing we already knew. Almost nothing. The medical records had not been consulted. Dr. Roth had not been contacted. The chart I had held out in my own kitchen had not been reviewed. She had taken the word of a man with an obvious motive, amplified by a woman who had used her professional title like a crowbar, and acted on it without verifying anything. Samuel put that on paper in the way that only becomes possible when you have the documentation to back every word of it. 3 months. That is how long they kept our son from us once Samuel got involved. Not 6 to 8. Not the slow grind that Gary Thompson had described with the mild resignation of a man reading from a script he had read many times. 3 months of supervised visits, 2 hours each twice a week. A beige room, donated toys, a couch that had absorbed years of other families' worst days. Our son came home at 11 months old, smaller than he should have been, still uncomfortable after bottles, still not sleeping the way he was supposed to sleep. The first thing Clara did was call a new pediatrician. She held him for 2 hours first. Just held him, standing in the middle of the nursery with the gray elephant on the shelf behind her. Not sitting down, not moving. Just holding him like she was making sure he was still the same weight as the last time she had held him. Checking to make sure the months had not taken something she could not name. Then she called Dr. Martinez. Dr. Martinez was the kind of doctor who listened first. She spent an hour with us during the initial visit, asking detailed questions, taking notes, reviewing everything. Within a week she had an answer. Severe milk protein allergy. Our son had been allergic to dairy since birth. Every bottle of standard formula had been causing chronic inflammation that prevented his body from absorbing nutrients the way it should. He had not been failing to thrive because of our parenting. He had been failing to thrive because he was being fed something his body could not process, and nobody, not Dr. Roth, not DCF, not Janet Mills, who had stood in our kitchen with her clipboard while I held out a medical file, had ever ordered the $200 allergy test that would have shown it. Within 2 weeks of switching to hypoallergenic formula, our son was a different child. Gaining weight, sleeping, laughing the way babies laugh when they are not in constant, low-grade pain. I held that information for a moment when Dr. Martinez told us. And then I gave it to Samuel. The investigation into what Janet Mills had done, specifically, her decision not to review exculpatory medical evidence that had been physically placed in front of her, moved with the particular momentum of a case that is not close. Samuel built it methodically. The documentation of what she had been handed. The documentation of what she had not done with it. The medical records. The allergy diagnosis. The 40-page file Liam and I had assembled. The depositions. The paper trail of William's 6 escalating calls and Marilyn's fingerprints on the process. The agency settled. They acknowledged fault. Our record was expunged, completely, not partially, not conditionally. The flag that had been hanging over our future, over every background check and school volunteer form and job application for the rest of our lives, was removed. And the settlement number was substantial enough that I am not going to print it here, but I will tell you that Samuel had been right about all of it. Janet Mills was terminated for cause. Not resigned. Not quietly reassigned. Fired with cause, in the formal language of an institution acknowledging that one of its employees had failed at the most basic function of her job. I knew her last day. I made sure I knew it the way I had made sure I knew her name. I drove to the building and parked across the street. Leaned against my car, arms crossed, and waited. I did not know exactly what I was there for. I think I needed to witness it. I think after 3 months of supervised visits and beige rooms and watching my son reach for me and being told he would adjust, I needed to see the moment that particular chapter ended for her the way it had ended for us. She came out with a box. They always come out with a box. There is something about that image, the cardboard box of a professional life that has just been closed, that carries its own weight without any help from you. She saw me. I did not move, did not speak. She looked at me for a moment in the particular way of a person who understands exactly why someone is standing exactly where they are standing. Then she looked away and walked toward the parking lot. I got in my car. As I pulled out, I drove close to the gutter where the morning rain had pooled into a long, deep puddle running alongside the curb. I did not swerve around it. She was still walking. The water caught her from the knees down and kept going. I watched in my rearview mirror. She stood there, soaked, box in her arms. I drove away. I am not proud of it. I am also not proud of it. Some things exist in that space. Samuel had already begun constructing the civil case against William and Marilyn before our son came home. By the time the CPS settlement was finalized, that case was ready. William's world ended in pieces. The deposition was the beginning. Samuel had William under oath and walked him through every call, every escalation, every recorded conversation Marilyn had provided when she decided that throwing her husband under the bus was preferable to going down with him. There was a recording, and I want you to understand how specific and damning it was, of William saying, "Maybe if they lose the kid for a while, they'll appreciate family more." Another recording, "These kids need to learn there are consequences for disrespecting family. If taking the baby away for a few months makes them realize how much they need us, then that's what needs to happen." His face during the deposition, I was told, did something in the moment those recordings played that a face does when a person hears themselves become exactly who they feared they were. His employer was contacted. His security clearance, required for his government contracting work, was suspended pending resolution of criminal proceedings. He was escorted from the building. A man who had spent years performing authority lost his in a single afternoon. The civil case concluded with a judgment that left William and Marilyn financially destroyed. Not inconvenienced, destroyed. The kind of financial reckoning that ends with lease agreements and smaller rooms and a quieter life than the one you believed you had earned. William and Marilyn attend a church about 40 minutes from where they used to live. I found this out the way you find things out when you have been organized about collecting information for a year. I drove there on a Sunday morning 3 months after the judgments were finalized. I want to be honest about what I was going to do. I was not going to make a scene. I was not going to yell or perform, or give anyone a speech they would describe later as unhinged. I was going to walk into a room full of people who knew William and Marilyn, and I was going to speak, once quietly and factually, about what they had done. I found a seat near the front. I waited until the pastor opened the floor for what he called a time of reflection and testimony, which is a thing some churches do, which I had confirmed in advance. When the moment came, I stood up. I know some of you know William and Marilyn, I said. I am their son-in-law. I want to talk about forgiveness. The room was very quiet in the way rooms become quiet when something unexpected has entered them. A little over a year ago, I said, they filed false reports with Child Protective Services that resulted in our 8-month-old son being removed from our home for 3 months. The allegations were fabricated. The medical evidence was ignored. They placed him with William while the investigation continued. A federal investigation found that Marilyn had used her professional access to government databases to facilitate the case. William was recorded saying that losing the child for a while would teach us to respect family. I paused. I believe in accountability, I said. I believe that what they did deserves to be known by the people in their lives. And I believe that what comes after accountability, for them, for us, is something I am still working on. But I wanted you to know, because I think people deserve to know who they are extending community to. Then I sat down. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then the pastor said something about grace being complicated, which I thought was honest. When the service ended, I walked to my car. I did not look back. I do not know what conversations happened in that room after I left. I know that several people who had considered William a friend stopped attending that church by the following month. I know this because it got back to me through the particular way that information travels in communities where everyone knows everyone. I did not pursue it. I did not need to. I had said what needed saying. The rest was not mine to manage. Riley's downfall had the quality of a story that writes itself once the first thread is pulled. She had opened a GoFundMe during the legal proceedings. For her family's legal bills, she said. For her nephew, people gave. Her mother gave a speech about it in that same church. Money came in from neighbors, from church members, from people who believed they were helping a child. The GoFundMe closed on a Thursday. By Monday, Riley's Instagram stories were showing a Vegas weekend. Shopping hauls. A club with bottle service. Receipts she posted herself with the caption "treating myself after a hard year." One of Clara's cousins screenshot everything. The GoFundMe total. The closing date. The Monday morning receipts. The Louis Vuitton bag that appeared in 3 separate stories. When the screenshots circulated, and they circulated, Riley's friend group did not handle it quietly. One of them posted a public comparison on Facebook. The GoFundMe description next to the Vegas haul. A caption that required very little editorial help from anyone. The state attorney general's office became interested when evidence emerged that Riley had been systematically deleting donor comments asking where the money had gone. The screenshots of the deleted comments, which several people had taken before deletion, because people always take screenshots now, provided the documentation that turned a social embarrassment into a legal one. Fraud charges. Mandatory repayment with penalties and interest. A part-time candle boutique salary and a mounting legal bill. The math on that situation works out the way you would expect. 2 weeks after our son came home, we heard cars in the driveway. All 3 of them. William, Marilyn, Riley. They had bags. Toys. Clothes. They walked up to our front door without knocking and tried to open it the way people try to open a door they have decided belongs to them. I met them before they could. William tried to look past me into the house. He said, "We just want to see our grandson." He said, "We've been worried sick." He said it with the face of a man who has done a terrible thing and has decided that performing concern loudly enough will eventually transform the history of it. I told them they were not family anymore, that they were not coming in, that if they did not leave I was calling the police. Riley started her performance. Marilyn deployed her professional voice about what was best for children. And then William did something that I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for. He put his hand on my doorframe and tried to push past me. He made contact first. Let me be very clear about that. In front of witnesses on my own property, he initiated physical contact. I stepped out onto the porch to give myself room and I hit him once. Not in anger or not only in anger. In the specific calm of a person who has been handed a legal and moral justification they have been waiting for a year. William sat down on my porch steps with the stunned expression of a man who had spent decades performing toughness and just discovered the distance between performance and the thing itself. He did not get up immediately. Marilyn said she was calling the police. I told her that would be wonderful, and that I would be happy to explain to them that I had acted in response to him attempting to force his way into my home. The police came. I explained. The officers looked at William, still sitting on my steps. They looked at me. They filed the report the way the facts required them to file it. The restraining orders I filed the next morning were granted without resistance. We moved to North Carolina. New city, new start, no one who knows our business. I took a pay cut I did not care about. We found a house with a good yard and a daycare with a director who, when Marilyn called to report concerns about our parenting, phoned us immediately and said, "I have been running this center for 15 years and I have never had a grandmother call to report her own family. I thought you should know. I keep telling you, there are still reasonable people in the world. You just have to outlast the unreasonable ones long enough to find them. Our son is 17 months old now. He has been on hypoallergenic formula since Dr. Martinez figured out what everyone else had missed. And the difference in him is the kind of difference that makes you want to put your fist through a wall when you think about the months it went undiagnosed. He is gaining weight. He is laughing. Last Sunday I took him to a diner, one of the old ones with red vinyl booths and coffee that has been sitting too long, and I let him try to eat scrambled eggs with a fork. He made a disaster of it. Got more on the table than in his mouth. Was so proud of himself that he kept looking at me to make sure I was seeing it. I was seeing it. An older waitress watched him and smiled and said, "He's determined. I bet he's going to be trouble when he gets older." I told her he already was. She brought him a little cup of fruit because she had grandkids and knew how messy things got. And I sat there in that booth watching a stranger offer my son simple, uncomplicated kindness, and I thought, this is what they tried to take. Not the big moments. Not the legal victories or the settlements or the moment in a parking lot with a puddle or the moment standing up in a church and saying what needed to be said. This, a Sunday morning and scrambled eggs and a little cup of fruit from a kind stranger and my son looking up at me with those eyes. He grabbed my finger when we were leaving, looked up at me, said, "Dad." He has said it maybe 30 times now. Still hits me like the first time. William and Marilyn are in an apartment now. The lawsuit took what the job loss started. I drive past it once a month. I pull up to the curb and I sit there, and when one of them appears in a window or steps outside and sees my car, I take a dollar bill out of my wallet and I hold it up and I light it and I watch it burn down to my fingers and then I drive away. I know how that sounds. I know it is petty in a way that serves no practical purpose. But I also know what it says. That I have enough, that I am fine, that their 3 months of cruelty did not cost me anything I cannot replace, and that I am going to show up every month for as long as I feel like it just to make sure they know I remember. Some things you do for documentation, some things you do for your lawyer, and some things you do because the part of you that sat in a beige room twice a week watching the clock run out on your 2 hours with your own child deserves to watch a dollar burn. To anyone out there who is in the middle of it right now, get the right attorney the first day. Document everything, every interaction, every name. Do not let them intimidate you into silence or gratitude or the particular paralysis that comes from believing the system is too big to fight. The system is not too big. It is just counting on you to believe that. The truth has a way of surviving. Make sure you are building the structure to hold it when it does. We won. We are fine. Our son is thriving. Game over. If this one landed differently than you expected, you know what to do. Subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments. At what moment did you realize the story was never really about revenge? We'll see you in the next one.